Welcome to MMA Fancast. My name's Luke, and I am joined by recent and today guest, Christian, strictly business, Carr. Christian, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Look forward
I,
to talking.
it's great having you on the show. Happy Thanksgiving to you. Happy Thanksgiving week to everyone who's going to be watching this. I said you were a recent guest because you were. You recently
Mhm.
were on the show for the first time to talk about your debut as a pro
Mhm.
when you had a quick turnaround. Let's talk about that real quick. What was it like going from your first pro win right back in to training camp to get ready for this fight? And then we'll get into the fight.
Good. I would have liked to have a little bit more time to hang out and enjoy myself a little bit, but I just knew there was going to be a little gap in competition from um when they have shows planning to go. So basically it was like November or I'm waiting a little while. So I just jumped on it. Also like we'll get into a little bit, I was fighting a reoccurring opponent that I would have fought on a day's notice if I would have been offered. So uh it is what it is. But
Well,
we're right now, and I'm glad to enjoy the holidays.
yeah, it works out great. It's way better to fight before uh, a holiday like Thanksgiving or Christmas than right after.
Oh yeah.
A few years ago, 247 Fighting Championship, because of the COVID restriction, had a fight on Wednesday night before Thanksgiving and the Saturday after Thanksgiving. And I felt worse for the people that fought Saturday after Thanksgiving than for the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. Hey, it's going to be a good day the next day,
Yeah.
regardless. You fought for Maverick. It was just a few days ago, Saturday, November 19th. So thanks for coming on the show so soon after to talk about how everything's went. Let's get into your opponent. Usually we would talk about your performance. We will because it was incredible. But we do need to talk about Sean Stefanelli. You fought him once before as an amateur. Kind of give a quick recap. It ended up being your only loss in your amateur career by split decision. So kind of talk about that fight briefly, but also kind of emotionally what's been happening the last couple of years since that, because you mentioned you take him on one day's notice. So clearly that was a spur under the saddle, so to speak.
Yep. Well, yeah, actually I believe what's today's date? It's the 22nd. So 3 years ago, tomorrow would be the first time we would have fought. So I was I would have been 20 years old then. I was undefeated at the time and unfortunately I lost a decision. Sean, always hats off to him. He's a great guy, he's a nice guy. You know, he's an outstanding fighter and I really have a ton of respect for him. But, obviously him being that one guy who beat me in my amateur career was something that, for these last 3 years, I was just mentioning with my girlfriend the other day. It's like, it's a little bit of a weight off my shoulder because, anytime somebody asks me about my fights, hey, I'm 5-1 as an amateur. Oh, how'd you lose the one? You really don't skip over that. It's like, oh, I lost a split decision. And I don't look back on that like, oh, like I should have won, and I sit there and complain about it because I ultimately learned so much from that experience. Like they say, you win or you learn, whatever cliche you want to use. But if you take the time to do so, you will. And so I really try to focus on what I could improve in that situation. So it was really big to me to just kind of take off the one blemish I had and to be able to do it in a decisive manner where, it wasn't a split decision the other way this time around where, we're walking with questions unanswered again. So, I'm just kind of relieved that it's over with. He's an outstanding guy and, I'm lucky to be able to compete against him again and to come out victorious.
Well, and I think it's a hats off to you and your maturity, as well as how strictly business is your nickname, and so it's a sport, it's a business. Obviously, he's a good opponent. I was going to point out to people that may not have followed Sean so much after your first fight with him, he had a 2-1 pro record coming into the fight you just had. But actually a 2 win in a row. He dropped
Mhm.
his first pro loss, so he was coming off 2 wins. So this is a guy that you've pointed out is not only a good competitor but good at the pro level, which obviously makes a difference. Now let's get to round one. You ended up finishing him 31 seconds into round two, which I want the absolute breakdown of what happened because it's such a unique finish. But you're known for your unique submissions. We've talked before about some of the crazy submissions you'd want to pull off. in MMA, and you got to pull off one that maybe you weren't even planning on. But let's talk about round one, your second time doing the 5 minute rounds. So how was
Right.
round one for you going up against Sean?
So you know, in our first meeting, he won a lot of grappling positions with me, and like I said, in learning from that, my goal was to find some more time on my feet. I was kind of stubborn in our first outing where it was like, I know he's a strong grappler. I grew up wrestling since I was 4 years old. I would say jujitsu is my strong suit of all things. I didn't want to get out grappled by anybody. And, that was something that was kind of hard for me in the moment to try to make the decision of, am I going to try to fight this guy on the feet in our first outing, or I just want to, be stubborn and out grapple him because I think I'm a better grappler. So I found myself overcommitting in a lot of positions where maybe I wasn't, doing the best to, anchor myself in a lot of positions. So I lost a lot of positions, which ultimately led to me losing that split decision, right? So going into the future, my last amateur fight, I fought a guy who I would say who is a very similar style to him, a very strong wrestler. I would say has a little bit more dangerous stand up, in my opinion, just because he has such great power. And I tell people I basically fought the fight I should have fought against Stefanelli our first time around. And I found a lot of success in avoiding the grappling situations until I opened up opportunity down the road. Right. So in finding success in that fight, I had confidence coming into this fight. I still knew it was very dangerous for me to end up in grappling positions because he's so strong. He's so good at controlling position. I wouldn't say he's as much of like a scrambler as I would be. I do well in motion. He does well in solidifying position, and he's very good at that. So, we come out in our first round. I'm trying to work my stand up. He shoots on me, and the stubborn grappler in me kicked in. I found opportunity to get under his neck. A position I work a lot when people shoot head inside single on me. I try to attack the neck off an angle, and then feed for a far side wrist so I can control and work myself to the back. So I find myself in that first round. He shoots on me. I find the control of the neck position. I miss the far side angle, what I would call my anchor, where I anchor myself off to make sure I'm solidifying basically my best positional opportunity for the choke, which is my chest to his back. So I lose that. I end up on bottom. He does his thing in controlling top position. And it was just, it was frustrating. Being on bottom, I wasn't getting hit a lot. He was opening up with a lot of strikes. I found a lot of success in defending myself, but it's dangerous having a guy who's positionally sound on top of you and trying to throw an elbow through your forehead. So I was just kind of in the moment. I said to him, we're on the ground. He's on top of me. I said, man, you got stronger. And then he didn't say anything back to me. So I don't think he wanted to have fun. So, I kept trying to work up. I find a lot of success for myself in almost letting people feel comfortable in top positions. So they jump on opportunities to transition so that I can find opportunities to escape. So there's some situations where I was in there and I was maybe just trying to wait a little bit so that he would maybe try to progress, but he was happy with staying in like a half guard, or I believe at one point he got to a side control. So I didn't find a lot of success in creating motion for him until I eventually from side control I tried to do like a punch through escape. I like to do. I ended up getting up front headlock. We got through some scrambling positions and I ended up finishing the round on top, right? I knew going into that second round, it's taxing, holding me down for 5 minutes. I don't know the exact amount of time, but it was probably close to 5 minutes. He was on top of me, at least 4, I'd say. So I was basically like, all right, I really didn't have to do much. I felt good cardiovascularly going into the second round. And I knew going into that, I lost that first position because I rushed it. And I knew he's probably going to take that same shot. And I can find success if I work that fundamental game plan of that position the way that I process it in my head. Right. So we go out, I'm still looking to score on my feet. My goal is still to keep this on the feet as much as possible. But, I score off a lot of people's takedowns and stuff. So we go out second round, and I go out to throw a head kick, I believe, and then he shoots on me again. So now I basically hit kind of like an S sit position. I had a leg up in front of me. He was head inside single. I find my under the neck position. I anchor myself off the far side wrist. And then it's basically just a game of trying to keep my hip pressure on his shoulder, his near side shoulder there, so that his shoulder stays down so he can't build a base and connect his hands. And then making sure I'm continuing to stay anchored to that far side wrist. So people mention, I finish my choke with one hand, and that's something I practice all the time. And I tell my guys in my classes all the time that I'm coaching that it's like wrist control from the back and chest positioning is your most important things, So aside from scoring points in say jiu-jitsu tournaments, my hooks aren't what's keeping him in that position, because if I'm not controlling my chest to his back, I don't have opportunity for chokes. And if I'm not controlling a wrist, in my opinion, I'm giving him lots of opportunity to create space side to side. Mm-hmm. So basically I get in on my position off his single leg, I crush your shoulder, I get through, I peel him back into like a crucifix position. I'm not really worried about throwing my hooks in. I think maybe I ended the fight with them in there. But what's important to me there is I have my wrist control. I always work through my choke arm. Right? I always tell the guys I want my arm to come through, and I basically want to be able to put my thumb across the back of his neck. Mm-hmm. Right. And then it's a little bit of a different finish because I'm not squeezing with both hands here. Right. So I always tell my guys, I'm here. My thumb's on the back of his neck. I can press my elbow through his chest, and then I pull on you. I basically pull down and around, and I'm basically using my head as my other arm. So I'm driving with my head as I'm pinching. I'm working like this. And then just in the same way where that you would anchor off your arm or your hand to finish from that, like a two-hand rear naked choke position, I'm anchoring off his wrist and creating a counter pressure by driving. So I'm punching with my wrist control as I drive and pull and compress. I always say compress, not squeeze, because when I compress, I'm using more muscles in my body. I say like I'm engaging more muscles. I'm not taking those times where I'm squeezing, fatigue, release. They have opportunity to escape. I can compress and just continue to constrict in that position and continue to contract my muscles. And I find more endurance in those positions. So like I said, I mention these guys all the time. The wrist control is key, and my chest position is key. So I got my wrist control. I got my chest position. I have my thumb on the back of his neck. And, I'm looking at some pictures and stuff from the fight. And just like I coach these guys, just like I harp on them in the gym, is exactly the positions I was finding myself in, just by fine tuning it in the room by myself and trying to articulate that to other people. And I'm super happy personally about being able to put on display something I show in the gym a lot, and certain aspects of the technique that I harp on specifically. And I can put it into practice, not only for the success of my own career, but to show my students that I'm working with, how important paying attention to each detail and solidifying like systematic ways to control each position, so that you have basically a mindless process to working through, because you articulate it the proper way, and you just have your order of operations that you follow, and as long as you're following it the way you should, you'll find success.
Well, first off, congratulations on a really impressive finish, but I would also say congratulations on mentally looking at the first round. It was great for you to kind of give us the breakdown, because for anybody out there, I want to kind of point out, Christian, that I always say as a mental health counselor, it's less about what happens to you. It's more about the way you perceive what happened to you. Mm-hmm. Some fighters that are more in the emotional, easily frustrated would come back after the first round and basically in their mind be, this sucks, I'm losing, he's held me down the whole time, blah, blah. And you saw it as, well, holding me down meant that he's fatigued. I avoided, like you pointed out, you went through a checklist. You avoided facial damage, which of course is very important. You created a scramble. You ended up even getting out of it. So if it was an unlimited jiu-jitsu, because some guys still get into jiu-jitsu tournaments, you got out of it. You got to a better position. I think I always encourage people to recognize that the breaks in a fight really, really should like click over a new chapter and say, okay, because sometimes guys will have a great first round and then they'll kind of coast because they think they're ahead. And other times the opposite's true. They have a rough first round and they kind of just turn it off. So I think you did a great job of sort of finding that, hey, that's done, on to the next one, which really makes a difference. What's really cool that you pointed out, I talk to athletes that become coaches all the time. Talk a little bit more, because one of the things that you pointed out is how detailed you have to be as a coach in order to train, particularly a style, like you're mentioning a style. Anybody can train the traditional rear naked choke, which has since been modified to kind of the double hand down the back.
Yep.
Because so many people would just fight the top hand. And so I think over time, Eddie Bravo was one of the first ones, 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu, to kind of create a style that was indicatively his. And it's interesting because you point out that the strictly business style is more about chaining and sort of a different fundamental approach, as opposed to hooks, more chest to back. So talk about how long ago you started this modified rear naked choke with some of the finishings that you've now perfected.
Right. So I'd say leading up to about my last amateur fight, I basically, I had to be honest with myself in a little bit about, like, where do I want to put myself in these fights? And the thing is like, sure, I want to go out. I want to get a ton of different finishes. I'd love to go out, knock these guys out. I love to, finish people with whatever. But looking at the longevity of the sport, I need to understand how to go out and be in my safest place possible. Right. And what's safer than being on somebody's back. Right. So I already have, grown up and just, doing the sport of jiu-jitsu and wrestling. I had a ton of ways to get to people's back. Right. And I found a lot of success getting there, but I wasn't finding a lot of success finishing from there. So I spent a lot of time going into that last amateur bout I have, thinking about, like, what can I do to solidify my positions on these back? And then basically I found out that if I'm connected to a wrist, at least one wrist at one time, I'm at least stopping them from turning into me on that side. Right. And then I'm basically going away from, your standard kind of wrist control, where people like to like C grip the wrist, to how I like to just kind of like some people call it like the praying mantis grip, or just no thumb grip, whatever you want to say. I like to do the no thumb grip, and rather than like gather and squeeze toward me, I like to just pry, because I find more success in holding my endurance there, right? Because how dangerous am I on somebody's back if I can't use my hands, right? So if I don't have the endurance to continue to fight there, how can I work for a finish, right? So I found ways in the same way where I kind of spoke about, squeezing versus compression. I found ways to be able to continue keeping pressure on people without fatiguing myself, because even if you're winning, it's a lot of effort to continue to stay in positive position, right? So what's your best opportunity to stay in positive position, but also have the energy to continue to work from there? So just little things that I was doing there. And then basically it got into, okay, the wrist control is working for me, but people start to escape their hips and get away. What's next is basically where my chest position is. So I always like to tell people, I'm always kind of keeping center chest position. My head a lot of times is favoring my wrist control side, and my hips are kind of on a diagonal, right? So I can kind of compress with my legs. Say I don't have hooks in a turtle position or something like that. If I have hooks in, I like to work my wrist control side to the floor, because what's your best opportunity to escape from my back position is to get your back to the floor and to escape. And if you can't turn toward my wrist control side, you can't escape to the floor. And if the wrist control side's to the floor, good luck flipping me over to the other side when I have this pry position where I can keep your elbow away, so you can't, work to the other side. It basically started with a knack for wanting to control position. I'd go into, say, jiu-jitsu rounds, and I'd be like, okay, I want to get the back and I want to hold it for the entire round. I don't want to lose the back for the entire round. Right. And then it came into, how important are the hooks? Hooks are important, I'd say, but I'd say as far as continuing to hold the position, it goes chest position, and then wrist control would be my most important things, I would say. Because even if people say hip out to get their hips to the floor, if I have good square position, chest to your back, and I have a wrist control, I can follow around, I can rebuild my base, I can continue to keep your chest to the floor so you can't posture up on me. And I have a lot of opportunity to transition. Say you clear my hooks, I can always work back toward them, but I don't necessarily need to have them. I can work to, my crucifix positions. There's tons of options, right? But then, as far as working toward this finish and fitting this finish into my arsenal, typically, it's just like, even if you gather a rear naked choke position, but say you lose your bottom hook, right? They still have the opportunity to start to escape their hips out to the outside and clear their way out and stuff, right? So my coach has always been really articulate in the way that he describes his jiu-jitsu. And, I try to look at it in the same way. And I look to try to build systems, like I was mentioning earlier, to make sure that I look at positions with a purpose. And that's something that he's always been really good at, even if it's, say, like not like his premier position where he spends a lot of his time, he can answer your questions because he's just super articulate in any position. And so it was really big to me to try to keep that wrist while I'm trying to work for a finish. And so, just like you have a collar choke with some people, you just finish with a collar. So how can I do that with one arm, So as long as I can get deep and then I work that compression, right? I'm folding the chin as I compress through this position, right? I start to break your neck down. I start to drive with my head, right? I don't need my other hand on that other side because now I'm driving here. And then it's also really hard for you to start to reach up and defend this choke if the side that my hand's choking you on is stuck to your rib cage, right? So if I'm anchoring you down here, you can't reach up and start to peel me off. You're doing this whole reach thing. You're reaching above my elbow. You're trying to reach the whole way around your neck while I'm choking you, and my whole arm's in your space here. So I just find like chest position, and you can ask the guys I coach at the gym, it's chest position, wrist control, and a single arm choke is where I like to be on these back control positions, because it's my best path to success in my safest positional opportunity. So that's the way my brain processes it. And I just try to pass it on to people. I feel like I ramble a lot at times, and I kind of stop myself sometimes, like, you guys get what I'm saying, or am I just talking so much? Because I feel like this is one of the biggest discoveries of my jiu-jitsu thing, and I just hope people can understand it on the level that I feel I can articulate it.
Well, and I think what's cool, particularly about jiu-jitsu, but all of mixed martial arts, is that there is a philosophical approach to it, right? I mean, obviously, original jiu-jitsu being Japanese before it got imported and got tweaked into Brazilian jiu-jitsu. One of the original concept of it was that you're attacking fundamentally weak parts of the body. You could say joints, but obviously a throat's not a joint, but it's a fundamentally weak part of the body. And by technique over, it doesn't matter how strong you make a bicep, your elbow's still weak type thing. So I think having a philosophy makes a lot of sense. For some learners like myself, you rambling and giving all the explanation is perfect, right? Because I think explaining something and understanding not just the what, but the why is super valuable. To some learners in your group, they may just want to drill it 10 times or 30 times or 40 times and not necessarily need to know the reason or the rationale, but they can still drill it in. I think it's great to have both, to have the drilling, like you mentioned. There's always a learning curve from the mat to the cage, right? From some type of training environment to the cage. You mentioned, which is super important for fighters or jiu-jitsu practitioners to get, is to start training in your practice in a way that's mentally sharp. Like you mentioned, you try to go an entire round and never get off somebody, that chest to back. I know that I forget which coach, but it was a coach on YouTube years ago, which I thought was really good, was encouraging coaches that sometimes have to mix skill levels of jiu-jitsu practitioners. Maybe you don't have a bunch of brown belts
Mhm.
and black belts. And he was saying to just handicap the higher ranked people by telling them what leg they couldn't use or what arm they couldn't use or what position they had to stay out of or use, like in your case. And there's a way for a really high level jiu-jitsu practitioner to get good work in with a white belt. You just have
Mhm.
to kind of mentally change it. If you just go to all your skills, well, sure, you're gonna destroy the lower rank belt. And it's the same thing with a lower rank belt going up against higher ranked people. They should be trying everything they can to kind
Mhm.
of make that up. So very cool. Are you going to name this choke? Because you gave a very technical name, which
Mhm.
is obviously a single arm choke with opposite arm wrist control. Do you want to name this before it becomes your signature after you, or do you want to name it after your coach or your gym? Because we got to give it a name, just like the Mr. Wonderful, which to my understanding, the Mr. Wonderful, which is sort of like a modified behind the back single arm Kimura type thing.
Uh-huh.
Was only really used once. I don't think anybody ever started calling it Mr. Wonderful, but it was certainly a cool nickname. So, what nickname can we call this technique? Since it's something that you very well may find several more times in your
Yeah.
career.
Hey, nothing better than strictly business. You know what I'm saying?
A strictly business choke.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not the best of the nicknames, mine myself was brought on to me, but I like to work this choke, and I see myself finishing a lot more people with working these fundamental techniques. So, if we want to tag a name to it, none better than mine.
Let's go strictly business. It's the strictly business choke. So for people, your little 30-second video of round two is on your Facebook page. So for
Mhm.
anybody watching this, check it out on your Facebook page. It's gotten a lot of views. Obviously, it's a beautiful. And now that you've broken it down frame by frame, I think it even shows more of what's going on. Scrambles, you mentioned scrambles. I think scrambles and sort of wild exchanges or scrambles show the most level of technique because to your
Mhm.
point, your opponent's very good at um, staying heavy or sort of concreting a position, whereas you get more into scrambles, which is obviously
So
um,
real quick, I was actually just mentioning to my girlfriend. She just came back from, she's done a handful of jujitsu classes with me, but I was explaining it to her a little bit. We speak about scrambles. I grew up wrestling my whole life. I was always really into continuing motion. I mentioned to her, the beauty of jujitsu is found through continued motion. You don't see two very good jujitsu guys clashing a lot. There's not a lot of clash and stop in like what I would call like beautiful jujitsu. So the scrambling aspect of it and the continued motion and the opportunity to in the moment mindlessly continue to transition position by position, whether it's through your successful movement or through a counterattack of your opponent, is the true beauty of jujitsu in my opinion. So I'm just super big on that kind of concept. That true beautiful jujitsu is continued motion, and it's really just art that's happening in front of you.
and for a lot of gyms, I think yours included. I used to call that like flow, like
Yep.
get into so where it wasn't just somebody like locking down a certain position and then really nothing's been happening. We
Mm-hmm.
would do flow where you're kind of not allowed to just sit in one. You had to, even if you lock something up, you had to kind of reach over, do something else, kind of create those scrambles. One thing that's very interesting when you bring up naming something, and this is going to your wrestling base because you said you've been wrestling since you were 4 or 5. The Gable grip, named after Dan Gable, who is now in his 70s. So this is a gentleman who's obviously a legend, Olympic champ. But one of the things that he invented is the Gable grip, right?
Yep.
And you wouldn't think something as simple as this.
Mm-hmm.
He actually finished guys with what they call like the gut uh, crunch
Gut
or
wrench.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
where you get in there and gut wrench, I think is what it was called.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is little techniques can become just adapted. And so it'll be interesting to see how many people start to kind of use the flow that Strictly Business that that you're talking about, where I mean, a hand placement is still called Gable after almost 50 years because
Yep.
it became the way people now control
Mm-hmm.
people in wrestling. So and we've even seen in jiu-jitsu things slowly shift in MMA because practitioners change up what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So now that you are 2-0 as a pro, your type of jiu-jitsu is showing to be very effective. What would you like to kind of see in the spring or whenever, which will probably be after the winter break or after
Yep.
after some
Mm-hmm.
that. So what do you kind of want to improve upon, or what do you want to see next out of Strictly Business?
I mean, what's next for me is, whatever opportunity comes next. I always like to explain to people, in the sport that I'm in, and especially in the position I'm in early in my pro career, that every opportunity I have is the biggest opportunity of my career. No fight that's already happened is bigger than the one that's coming up. So I'm just looking forward to continuing to push myself in my training room and helping my teammates get better, which ultimately is helping me get better. I work with a ton of tough guys who give me a lot of tough work on a regular basis, and we all get together, and most of those guys are competing in jiu-jitsu a lot and finding a lot of success with that. So I'm still helping these guys out in that aspect, but I'm just looking forward to getting some competition next year, and being able to continuously display my hard work, and hopefully, if all goes well and all goes to plan, I continue to find success in what I'm doing, and I continue to reinforce the things that I teach, especially to my students. That's really big to me, that I'm going out there and I'm doing what I'm showing, and I'm doing them in a way that that makes them excited and makes them really want to show up to the gym the next day and keep learning from me, and I just want to keep getting better is the ultimate goal.
Well, it's an honor having you back on the show to do exactly what you just did tonight, which is to break down not only your performance, but what you've been doing in the gym. And you're a beautiful example of the blend between a really high level athlete and someone who sees coaching as sort of a sport in and of itself, to become better and better as a coach. Right now, that's applying to you as an athlete, which is also sort of a nice blend. So happy Thanksgiving to you and everyone.
Thank you very
And
much.
thanks so much for coming on. Can't wait to see what's next for you. You've been listening to Luke Payson for MMA Fancast with Christian Carr. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.